Advanced parts mapping. You've already done one form of this exercise, that is, to map your parts, earlier in the book. This is the advanced version because you'll be using what we call tormentors to locate and work with whatever clove of the garlic got triggered by the person or event. Here's a personal example. I was hard at work on a presentation early this morning and suddenly realized I'd forgotten to join an important call with my 5 brothers to work out some business dealing. There was a lawyer on the call too, and I was the only brother who didn't make it. I'm the oldest of 6, and I wasn't your typical older brother in the sense that I was probably the least responsible one. As we were growing up, my father was pretty hard on me about that. So I have a critic that can imitate my father pretty well when I screw up. And I immediately noticed this part kicking in today. Although it's changed quite a bit over the years, when I make any type of significant mistake, it still does the same thing to some degree. And then that always brings up an exile, which means I notice a rush of shame take over my body. I felt so disappointed after this happened, after all the work I've done on myself. I thought I was beyond that degree of internal reactivity. But since I'm committed to using each episode to grow, I called the person I trade sessions with right away, and I used this incident as a focus to do more healing work inside. I tell you this story to inspire you to think of a situation that you'd like to explore more and learn about the parts involved. Before you begin, I want you to note that you're going to be learning a little about the exiles your other parts protect. You won't actually be getting close to an exile, but for some people, just learning about their exiles can be triggering. So if at any point the exercise feels like it's too much, then pause and step out and check with yourself and remind your parts that you're still there. And if that helps, then you can go back in. But if it doesn't, then just skip this exercise. So think of a time in your life when you were quite triggered by something. And as you think of that situation, notice the parts that were triggered, and then pick a protector from that clove of the garlic to focus on. Then place your attention on that protector exclusively, finding it in your body or around your body, and notice how you feel toward it. And if you feel anything extreme toward it, you're afraid of it, for example, that's just another part. So move your focus to that one for a second. And then, as we did earlier in the dilemma exercise, notice the two of them, the original protector and the one who has an attitude about it, and how much they fight inside of you. You can also notice if there are any other protectors that jump in to ally with either side, or even take a third position. So far, we're not interacting with any of these parts. We're just getting a sense of this network that comes up around this trigger in your life. We're getting to know the protectors involved so far. At some point, as you watch this dance of your protectors, see if you can open your mind more toward them so you can learn more about them. If you can't get to that curious place, that's okay. You can just spend the exercise noticing. But if you do become interested in what all this activity is about, then go ahead and ask each one of them about the vulnerability it protects. What does it fear would happen if it didn't take its position? If your protectors answer that question, you'll begin learning about the exiles that drive their extreme responses. And without going directly to those exiles, see how much of a sense of them you can get. Can you get a sense of what they're like? Can you become more aware of their vulnerability? So, as you learn more about what your protectors are trying to take care of, this may actually help you open your heart more to them. Because as you get more of a sense of what they're dealing with and how high the stakes are, you have compassion for them. Often, these protectors are like parents who have a highly vulnerable child. They fight and polarize about how best to protect that child because the stakes are so high if the child were hurt. The difference is that these protectors aren't old enough to be parents. Usually they're young themselves, and they're in over their heads, and they're just trying to do their best. So let them know you get all that, and tell them you'll keep working with them, and let the exiles know you're aware that they're in there. You can't visit with them today, but at some point you're going to try to help them too. And remember, what happens in that inner world has tremendous implications for what happens in the outside world. So now bring your focus back outside and turn your attention back to this external world. You're leaving the internal world, but you're not forgetting it.
For some of you, I suspect that exercise was a little bit difficult, especially as you get to know about exiles. It can be disconcerting to know they're there, and sometimes, even though I said not to go to them, you do get hits of their pain or terror or shame, as well as the kinds of beliefs they carry. That can be troubling for the protectors who've been trying to keep them contained all this time. It's not uncommon to feel a little overwhelmed, and I understand that it can be difficult. Often when we touch an exile even slightly, there's a big backlash from protective parts that are afraid, or parts that might now want to criticize you. But if you can keep the perspective that it's just because they're scared, then you can reassure them and help them remember who you are, and maybe that can help you stay grounded. You are a person who has courage, confidence, clarity, feels connected, and is grounded. If you're feeling anything that tells you you're not, just know that those messages are coming from parts who don't know who you are. Recall that they often believe you're much younger than you are. It's helpful to not totally blend with them and enter their world, but instead reassure them, separate from them, and help them trust that these explorations are hard, but you can do it because you're not a little kid anymore, and you're here to help them.
Working with triggers. If some of your parts were triggered by the last exercise, here's a practice to help you with that. So notice what's happening in your body and your mind after having gone into that inner world for a few minutes. If there are any parts triggered by that, rather than blending with them, just notice them. As you do, then ask them to separate from you just a little so you can be with them without being them. And if it's possible to be curious about their triggers, when you're in that more separated state, just ask why this was so hard for them. What do they want you to know? As you're with them and not in them, see if you can reassure them that you're still there and remind them you're not young and you can help them too. And you understand that this is hard work and it's scary for some of your parts, but you're there with them. As you're with these parts in this compassionate way, just remind them that you've been taking care of them and yourself for a long time. You have some wisdom about how to help everybody in there feel better, and you're going to act on that wisdom. And then when the time feels right, you can shift back outside and take deep breaths if that helps.
I hope